So here I'll hand over to my colleague Rajesh, who will speak about the engineering side of things for exabyte scale data.
Thanks, Shraddha. Am I audible?
Yes, Rajesh.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, hi, my name is Rajesh Tamhani. As Shraddha mentioned, I work at ThoughtWorks in the engineering for research group. And specifically, I look into problems related to what we call as data intensive computing. And what is data intensive computing? We are going to come to that shortly. But before we start, let's think about what is in an exabyte. Uh, Shraddha, could you move to the next slide, please?
Yes.
All right. So uh, just this is just to give everybody a perspective, right? We talk about petabytes, we talk about exabytes. 1 million terabytes is what makes up an exabyte. So again, even to put things into perspective, right? When we talk about 1 petabyte of data, we are talking about roughly about 1,000 terabytes of data, which means that let's say you if you had to take 10 terabyte hard drives, and if you thought about how many hard drives it would take um, to store, or just the data that we are going to get in the first year, let's say about 150 petabytes is what's coming to the SRCs. We are talking about 15,000 hard disks, right? And these are 15,000 big hard disks. So uh, this is essentially, I think it starts giving us a scale of what kind of data that we are going to be dealing with. Moving on. All right. So let's look at the paradigms in compute, and we like to think about these paradigms because each when we kind of describe these paradigms, each of these quadrants requires a little bit of a different thinking or a different approach to how we do storage, compute, etc. So, for example, in the bottom left corner, we have small data and small compute, right? And typically now today we see this kind of the ability to do artificial intelligence and machine learning on mobile devices or even IoT devices, and so that's the basically the quadrant that encompasses this. If we move on to small data but large compute, you start seeing problems that are mathematically more complex to solve. Uh, Cryptography, crypto mining, all these fall into this paradigm. However, when we go up, we come to what is today the realm of data intensive computing. So where we deal with vast amount of data, and uh, data intensive computing, data driven scientific discovery, these usually fall in this realm, and SKA falls probably in the big data, big compute quadrant, though there might be some that actually require small compute. Uh, we can move on to the next one. So we've already heard, about what are the challenges when we are actually talking about petabyte scale storage, or uh, ch- challenges that we are going to face when we start approaching exabyte scale, right? If we had to store all the data that SK produced in 1 year, which is estimated to be roughly around 700 petabytes. Storing that and processing that is a non-trivial problem, right? On the engineering side of things, I think some of the things that we don't think about is the power consumption, the cooling that is going to be required for that. Just imagine, right, a single rack which kind of stores. Today you can store any up to 5 petabytes, or even there are solutions approaching 8.5 petabytes of data in a single rack, which is like a small cupboard. Uh, that can consume anywhere between 5 kilowatts and approaching 10 kilowatts. thinking about how much heat that generates and what you really need to do in order to cool that is going to start becoming a challenge very, very soon. And with SK, it's a very tangible problem in a very near future. There's a picture on this slide. It actually shows what you can expect in tomorrow's data centers, and one of it is actually immersing your CPUs and in a liquid cooling solution, or at a minimum having liquid cooling, basically coolants running through your racks in your data center. Even on the compute side of things, if you realize that searching just a simple problem, where is my data? If I have to look for my data and I have to search through over 1 petabyte of it, becomes a non-trivial problem. Performing provenance, data provenance becomes again a non-trivial issue. So again, moving on, there are basically ways we can approach this, but even before I get there, we should talk about just back of the napkin kind of a calculation, what computation will be involved in actually going through or sorting through or performing analysis of this kind of data. So a back of the napkin calculation, right? Let's say we have 1 gigabyte of data and we have 1 petaflop at our disposal. Sorry, I'm using some technical terms, but petaflop is quite a big number when it comes to computation. And gigabyte, I think all of us understand. Given this constraint, as we move from the complexity of our computation, right, from N to NQ, producing a result from that algorithm could take anywhere from few seconds to actually several thousands of years. Now, if you look at this, where machine learning algorithms is actually somewhere in the middle. They range from n square to n 2.6 complexity, n raised to the power 2.6 complexity. So again, when we start about even with a gigabyte, if this is the kind of computation, we really have to start thinking about what kind of algorithms are we using. Is this the most optimal way of doing the processing? Do we really require the level of precision that is that modern day computers or modern day GPUs provide? So all these things have to be taken into consideration. So moving on to the next, the thing is, so what do we have? What do we have for our solutions? So Yogesh already spoke about this, and this was something a computer scientist by the name of Jim Gray. He mentioned he was a researcher from Microsoft and also an advisor to the US government on supercomputing. And he said, hey, you know what? We can't bring the compute to the data when you're talking of petabytes of data. I mean, try downloading 1 petabyte of data over an FTP link, and it's a really significant problem. So we need to take our questions to where the data is sitting, and this means that the way we perform our computation today has to be opposite to what we have been traditionally doing, which is we have been taking data from large storage storage area networks and bringing them to our computers, and that's no longer possible. We need to be able to push our computation to over where the data is sitting. We need to be able to parallelize our computation. The other thing, again, we've heard this in our earlier talks, is we need to think about the workloads. What kind of workloads are we using, and basically design our computers, design our hardware and a compute and a storage to be able to meet those kind of workloads. So Yogesh again talked about arithmetic intensity. So if you've got arithmetic intensity that is low, like a factor of 0.5 or something, you really have to think about what kind of how you design your communication between the different peripherals, right? And those would determine whether we use what is called as high bandwidth memory, or consider using non-volatile random access memory, which you put all your storage into RAM and do your computation over there, or consider what what the Chinese have done in their SRC, right? Look at solutions like NVM Express, that is very fast storage. And this is something that we need to take into account when we understand what type of workloads we are doing. Now, when it comes to specifically to artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? We can actually leverage some of some of the accelerators that are available to us. GPUs, for example, are very good at training neural networks. So if you have got problems that have got neural networks and in machine learning, this is probably the approach to take. If you've got deep learning, you've got tensor processing unit TPUs, which are excellent at doing those kind of jobs. If you need your computation, you do not know what kind of computation or computational workloads you're going to receive. FPGAs are providing a means of actually creating reconfigurable computing. That means you can actually write your, you can actually burn your chips on the fly into something that for that specific workload, and change it again when your workload changes. And if you've got enough of, if your workloads are predictable and you're going to be doing the same jobs over and over again, then it might be actually cost effective to use something like ASICs, and use ASICs in your hardware. So to conclude, there is SKA is definitely a non-trivial problem. In fact, I think in the science world, it is probably once it goes live, it is going to top CERN in terms of the data that is generated. I think even in the enterprise, it is one of probably the most challenging problems anyone has seen in this decade. So there's no single silver bullet that we can employ to solve all types of challenges that this is going to throw. And what essentially it means is that at every step of the way, whether how we design our networks, what kind of hardware we deploy, what kind of storage systems we use, what kind of programming languages we use, what kind of techniques, tools we deploy, and how well we write our algorithms. All of these are going to really matter when it comes to actually creating scientific products out of the data we want to receive. With that, I think we are open to questions.
Thank you, Rajesh and Shraddha. So now let's see if there are questions and comments from the participants. Please raise your hand if you have any questions and comments from. Okay, I don't see anything here. Abhirup, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Nice talk. Just a naive question, being a kind of beginner on the enthusiast in AI/ML. Are these, you're talking about exascale, exabytes, right? Are the existing routines or packages which are available for like TensorFlow or scikit-learn, are they eligible or to scale up to this level?
So at this level, there are several considerations to. It's more the hardware, the memory that is required, and if you're going with the DIC approach, where we take the compute to the hardware, it would be more about the strategies in terms of, say now our data is stored at several different nodes. So we train the model on those nodes, and then how do we combine those models? So current libraries like scikit-learn and all, whatever level of hardware is available at the moment, they do quite well with it. So that's not a problem. And it has JobLib at the end that anyways does whatever parallelization is achievable in the hardware. So I would say the thinking of how to strategize this, whether to create separate models on subsets of data and then figuring out how to combine them, or training just on a subset of data and understanding whether that does well and evaluating that, that would be more of the questions to answer.
Okay. Okay.
And to add to that, I think even when it comes to our understanding of how this will scale, right? When we are talking about today doing this at petabyte scale or exabyte scale, I think even the Googles of the world are just scratching the surface. I think Shraddha mentioned one example where Google has actually published some papers on predicting precipitation at for weather modeling, and even there they are still scratching the surface when it comes to coming to scale. So today, as per the experience within the industry, I think we probably are at terabyte scale. We know how to do things at that scale. But as we start approaching petabyte, I think it's going to throw up a bunch of problems that we've probably not seen before. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other question? So I see one question from our YouTube streaming channel, but I think it's not specifically addressed to any of the speaker, but I don't know if one of you would like to take this up. Kiran Mehta asks, is there a risk tolerant budgetary commitment to continuously evaluate open source processor, storage, architecture, software technologies which keep presenting in HPC research? Highly potent for SKA. So, any of you want to comment on that?
Rajesh, do you have any comments on it? It was related to HPC, and if there are any open source evaluations which are available, right?
Yes.
So I think in terms of our own independent investigations that we are doing at ThoughtWorks, I guess we are looking at storage solutions, for example, specifically storage solutions, software defined storage that can go to petabyte scale. We are definitely looking at that. We of course share what we learn and what we have in terms of our findings with the science community in general. So it does. So these things do come up in our conversations. But I also have to mention that our own investigations are also based to a big part on organizations like who have done this before. And these organizations again are science-based organizations. CERN is a good example of that. Before SKA, I think it has been the one to kind of solve problems at this scale. And they are one of the organizations who employ a lot of open source tools. So in fact, contributors to some of the open source tools when it comes to storage and as well as compute.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think this is the last question for this session. We'll of course come back if there are more in the final discussion part. But here is one, I think, for Shraddha from the YouTube channel, again from Another Shraddha Bajade has asked, hi there, selection of the small batch size for training the model, will that increase our model accuracy? Also, the complexity may increase. So how to choose our model considering this?
So taking smaller batch sizes will definitely increase the number of steps required to train the model, because in each step now, instead of the ideal scenario would be to look at all the data in one pass. So, and because the data is growing and it's huge, instead of taking the whole data and needing it to require very high memory powers, memory computation powers, and memory itself, we take batches. So ideal would be to take batches which are still big enough for your memory to handle, so that the number of steps required for the algorithm to train reduces. So then your algorithm trains faster. Smaller, if you take smaller batch sizes, you are looking at smaller snapshots of the data in each pass, and hence the number of steps required to train the model and the time required will increase. And also the algorithms that were designed initially were designed taking the whole data into consideration. So the whole data is passed as a matrix through the model. Then the output of the model is compared with the existing model. Errors are calculated, and then that is propagated through. Now that is being done only on a subset of a data. So in order to achieve the same accuracy with less number of batch sizes, you will basically require more steps in training. So it's not that your accuracy will increase with less number of step sizes, your training time will increase.
Okay. Okay, so